In early 2010, life looked like a dream for Linday and Joseph Morrissey. They had adopted a sweet young son named Patrick from South Korea, and he quickly became the center of their world.
Let me ask you something. Do you know what a lie is? A lie?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you don't tell the truth and you do something bad.
And what happens when you tell a lie?
You get in trouble.
Every day revolved around making him happy, and the couple even playfully competed over who got to do the small things for him, like feeding or changing his diaper. Beyond family joy, their careers were thriving too. Linday held a high-ranking position at Jewish Family Services in Broward County, while Joe was a well-respected cancer researcher and professor at Nova Southeastern University. Their hard work had allowed them to create a stable and comfortable life. They lived in a beautiful home in Plantation, Florida, and could afford to give Patrick the best hobbies, lessons, trips abroad, and a strong connection with their local church through regular donations. In fact, Linday and Joe were so committed to growing their family that they had already started the process to adopt another child from Korea. They'd found a little girl who needed surgery for her cleft palate, and they were eager to bring her into their home and give her a loving family. It all seemed perfect, almost like a fairy tale. They were settled, happy, and filled with love and excitement for the future. But just as they were building this dream life, something shocking happened, casting a dark shadow over everything. Nearly 3 years later, their world would be flipped upside down, turning joy into unimaginable heartache. How could everything that seemed so stable and bright fall apart so suddenly? Well, Joseph and Linday Morrissey were landlords to a man named Randy Tundador, who was renting a townhouse they owned. But things were far from smooth with Tundador as their tenant. He lived there with his fiancée Hilda, her kids, her mother, and his own son, Sean. Trouble began when Tundador decided to make repairs around the house without asking the Morrisseys. Not only did he do these repairs on his own, but he also deducted the cost from his rent, a move Joseph and Linday hadn't agreed to. By early April 2010, tensions had hit a boiling point. On April 2nd, Joseph sent Tundador a formal letter, clearly stating that these deductions and unsanctioned repairs were violations of the lease agreement. When Tundador received the letter on April 5th, he was furious. The letter wasn't just a reminder of the rules. It felt like a personal challenge to him. Infuriated, he decided he was going to teach Joseph a lesson. Tundador reached out to his son, Tundador Jr., hoping he'd know someone who could intimidate Joseph. Jr., willing to help his father with this scheme, agreed on one condition: that he could move into the townhouse with his dad. That very night, Tundador drove out to Hollywood to pick up Jr., and together they started hatching a disturbing plan, a plot meant to scare Joseph in ways he'd never expect. What started as a tenant-landlord dispute was about to take a dark turn. With Tundador's anger and Junior's involvement, this father-son duo set off to do far more than just settle a rental disagreement. They were about to dive headfirst into a scheme that would change all their lives forever. But just how far would their grudge take them? And what would be the consequences of this reckless plan? Tundador was boiling with rage. His landlord, Joseph Morrissey, decided to evict him, and Tundador felt like his entire life was crumbling because of it. Desperate to make Joseph pay, he decided on a terrifying plan that went far beyond a simple revenge plot. Gathering a collection of intimidating tools, a gun, zip ties, a large knife, a screwdriver, and walkie-talkies, Tundador threw them into a box, ready to unleash his anger. His plan was to have his son, Junior, break into the Morrisseys' home, tie them up, and ransack the place for anything of value. Tundador carefully covered his tracks, making sure nothing could lead back to them. He ordered Junior to turn off his phone to avoid any chance of being traced, and even used a business phone for their communication. To avoid getting lost on their way to the Morrisseys' home, Tundador had his fiancée, Hilda, pull up the directions. By 10:37 p.m., they left the workshop, charged with a chilling purpose. When they arrived at the Morrisseys' home, Junior armed himself with the gun, slipped on double gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, and quietly climbed through an open window. The house was mostly dark, but it didn't take long for Junior to spot Linday in one of the brightly lit rooms. He didn't bother to cover his face as he confronted her, demanding she take him to Joseph, who was asleep on the couch in the living room. At this moment, what had begun as a tenant's grudge was about to turn into a nightmare for the Morrissey family. With each calculated step, Tundador and Junior's plan was sure to strip the Morrisseys of far more than just their peace and safety. So, what would come of Joseph and Linde as they faced this terrifying situation? Junior wasted no time as he burst into the living room, waking Joseph with a shout. Fear spread across Joseph's face as Junior quickly tied both him and Lindy's hands with zip ties, leaving them helpless. He then forced them into the master bedroom where their young son Patrick was asleep, unaware of the chaos unfolding around him. Junior ordered the terrified parents to kneel beside the bed, covering their heads with towels to block their sight. He kept Tundador updated on every step through the walkie-talkies, ensuring his father knew exactly what was happening. Once he felt satisfied that Linde and Joseph were secured, Junior opened the front door, allowing Tundador to enter the house. The orders were simple: find anything valuable. Junior rummaged through the bedroom, but when Linde offered him her wedding ring and some jewelry, he dismissed them, thinking they weren't worth much. Frustrated by a few dollars and some euros from Joseph's wallet, Junior reported back to his dad. Tundador wanted more money and he wanted it fast. With a menacing tone, Tundador instructed Junior to take the Morrisseys to the ATM and withdraw $5,000. This was a bold move that could escalate the already terrifying situation. Junior, determined to carry out his father's orders, drove them to the bank under his watchful eye. When they arrived, Linde desperately tried to withdraw the requested amount, but to their surprise, she could only get $500. The tension in the car was increasing as Junior realized how this plan was spiraling out of control. What would happen next? Would Tundador accept the meager sum, or would he push for even more? The Morrissey family's nightmare was far from over, and the stakes were growing higher with every passing moment. When they turned, Junior hastily retied the couple in the bedroom, his heart racing as he reported the disappointing haul to Tundador. Tundador's anger simmered just beneath the surface. He quickly ordered Junior to gather the Morrisseys' laptops and load them into his car. But then, Tundador made a chilling decision. He couldn't leave Joseph alive. Despite Junior's initial reluctance to go through with such a horrific act, Tundador was relentless. In a moment of sheer desperation, he aimed the gun at Joseph, but when it jammed, he resorted to the knife. The sound of the blade slicing through the air was followed by Joseph's desperate pleas for mercy, cries that fell on deaf ears. Tundador, lost in a rage-fueled frenzy, repeatedly stabbed Joseph, ignoring the horror of what he was doing. But the nightmare didn't stop with Joseph. Tundador, wanting no witnesses to his brutal act, decided that Linde and little Patrick had to go too. Junior, horrified by his father's escalating madness, tried to protest, but Tundador didn't listen. He began to spread gasoline throughout the house, preparing to set it ablaze. The weight of the situation crashed down on Junior. He was paralyzed by fear, torn between his father and the innocent lives at stake. In a terrifying moment, Tundador lit the fire, a blaze that quickly consumed everything around it. As flames roared to life, they fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of chaos and devastation. It was a night filled with unimaginable cruelty, a moment that would change the Morrissey family forever. In the aftermath of that horrific night, Linde, who had been tied up during the attack, somehow managed to free one of her hands. The adrenaline coursing through her veins pushed her to act, even as she couldn't help Joseph during his desperate fight for life. The horror of that night would haunt her, but she knew she had to find a way to survive for Patrick's sake. She could see Joseph struggling, twitching in pain as he fought against the horrific injuries inflicted upon him. Suddenly, she noticed an orange glow coming from the kitchen, and the blaring fire alarms filled the air with a warning of danger. Panic surged through her as she heard the sound of the two attackers leaving through the front door, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. With one hand free, Linde attempted to move, but in her frantic efforts, she fell and injured her other arm. Desperation clawed at her throat as she called out for her son, Patrick, trying to keep her voice steady. To her relief, Patrick quickly found a pair of scissors, his small hands working diligently to cut her free from the remaining restraints. However, the situation was horrible. The house was already filling with thick, acrid smoke, making it difficult to breathe. Linde, knowing they had to escape, instructed Patrick to crawl toward the front door. As she turned to search for Joseph, her heart sank. She found him in the family room, unresponsive to her frantic calls. The sight was horrifying, but a wave of panic washed over her as she realized time was slipping away. Rushing outside, Linda screamed for help, her voice echoing in the empty night, but there was no one around to answer her cries. She turned back, wanting to save Joseph, only to discover the floor was wet beneath her. The horrifying realization hit her. It was because Joseph was on fire. Fueled by sheer will, she somehow managed to drag him outside onto the patio, her strength fading with each agonizing moment. But it was too late. As she looked at him, she knew he was already beyond help. The nightmare of that night weighed heavily on her heart. How could she face the reality of losing him? What would happen to her and Patrick now? The chaos around them mirrored the trouble within her, and the fight for survival was only just beginning. As Linda desperately dragged her husband outside, Patrick, showing remarkable courage for his age, raced to a neighbor's house. They quickly called 911, and soon an officer arrived at the scene.
I know earlier you said you knew something about some robbers or something?
Yeah.
What happened?
Robbers attacked our house and my dad died.
The officer was met with a horrifying sight. The house was engulfed in thick smoke, and Joseph's bloodied body was tied up on the patio. The acrid smell of gasoline hung heavy in the air, adding to the sense of dread. Inside, the officer noticed a gas can in the living room and flames flickering dangerously in the kitchen. The next morning, Detective Kindle arrived at the chaotic crime scene. After speaking with Linda, one of the survivors, he quickly focused on Junior as a potential suspect. Without hesitation, he issued a warrant for Junior's arrest and dispatched an officer to watch Tundidor's house from an unmarked vehicle, hoping to catch any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, the forensics team was piecing together the brutal events of the previous night. Through his meticulous examination, he discovered that Joseph had suffered multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and severe burns. The signs were chilling. The burns on Joseph's scalp and the right side of his neck indicated that he might have still been alive when the fire started, though not for long. The absence of carbon monoxide in his blood confirmed that he had been dead before the flames took hold. The investigation was heating up, and the urgency to uncover the truth grew with each passing hour. And as the detectives dived deeper, the answers seemed to lead them further into a web of betrayal and darkness, hinting at secrets that lay hidden beneath the surface of the Morrissey family's once peaceful life. The forensics team, in their investigation, discovered that during the violent attack, Joseph had put up a struggle. The defensive wounds on Joseph's hands and fingers clearly indicated that he had fought back against his attacker. Based on his findings, the doctors determined that the knife used in the assault had to be sharp, solid, and at least 7 to 8 inches long. This description matched a Bowie knife that was later found missing from Tundidor's collection, which police subsequently recovered during their investigation. Meanwhile, Junior's narrative began to unfold. He claimed that after they left the Morrissey home, he and Tundidor drove back to Tundidor's business. There, Tundidor handed Junior $60 to buy drugs. When Junior returned about an hour later, he noticed something chilling. Tundidor had burned the clothes he wore during the attack and had changed into a fresh set. The atmosphere was tense, and it was clear that they were trying to erase any trace of their horrific actions. They didn't stay at the business for long. Upon returning to Tundidor's townhouse, Tundidor handed Junior the cleaned and ground down knife, instructing him to dispose of it. Without hesitation, Junior followed these orders and tossed the weapon into a nearby lake, believing it would remove any connection to the crime. The rest of his night was spent in Tundidor's garage, using drugs, seemingly unconcerned about the brutal events that had just transpired. The following day, when the police arrived at Tundidor's house to question Junior, he panicked and hid in the attic, avoiding any confrontation. After the police left, Tundidor warned Junior that law enforcement was actively looking for him. Fear gripped Junior as he realized the gravity of their situation and the lengths they had gone to in order to escape the consequences of their actions. The web of deception was tightening, and with every passing moment, the risk of being caught loomed larger. Junior remained hidden in the attic, consumed by his drug use until the early hours of the next morning. Eventually, Tundidor woke him up and instructed him to leave the house. Junior made his way to a gas station, but in a crucial misstep, he made a few phone calls. This careless action allowed the police to track his whereabouts, leading to his arrest just 45 minutes after he arrived at the station. At the gas station, news spread that the person of interest in the murder of Professor Joseph Morrissey was now in police custody. Tundidor's father was understandably distraught, standing outside his shop with little to say. He expressed his unwavering support for his son, stating, "He's my son. I love him to death, and I'm going to support him to the end." Once in custody, Junior found himself sitting across from Detective Kindle at the police station. He defended himself firmly, maintaining his innocence by saying he had no connection to the murder and didn't know who was responsible. He expressed a desire to clear his name, insisting he hadn't committed the crime. He tried to depict himself as a victim of circumstances, portraying Tundidor as a supportive father who had always tried to steer him in the right direction, even though he had made his own mistakes. Tundidor, he emphasized, was a hardworking, respectable man who would never commit such an act. Detective Kindle remained skeptical, noting that he suspected Junior's involvement in the case and stating that they needed to clear the air. Junior, sensing the weight of the situation, responded with a hint of urgency, agreeing that they definitely needed to clear things up. The atmosphere grew tense, with both men knowing the truth had to emerge, though the path was challenging. Kindle was resolute in uncovering the facts, while Junior's future hung dangerously on how events would unfold from there. On April 7th, Junior was sitting across from the detective, spinning a fabricated story to deflect blame from himself. He tossed around names of supposed accomplices, hoping to divert attention. However, his story lacked credibility and began to unravel. A few weeks later, on April 29th, Junior met with the detective again. This time, he opened up more about the truth, although he still held back certain details. He realized that Tundidor, his own father, was attempting to pin the entire crime on him and his brother, Sean. Feeling betrayed and trapped, Junior decided it was time to come clean and testify against his father and brother. He revealed that Tundidor had been scheming to scam Joseph Morrissey out of money. Junior explained how his father had broken light switches in the rented townhouse and faked a slip-and-fall injury in an attempt to sue Joseph. Junior revealed that there had been nothing wrong with the light switch and that the supposed fall down the stairs was entirely fabricated, a part of his father's fraud. When further questioned, Junior expressed that although his brother Sean was many things, he wasn't capable of murder. Then, in a moment of urgency, he admitted outright that his father had been the one responsible. He recounted his father's chilling warning to keep silent, with a threat to kill him if needed. Junior knew when he saw the news headline that everything had spiraled out of control. When he confronted his father, Tundidor's cold response was simply, "Dead man can't evict me." Junior's heart raced as he finally came to terms with the reality of the situation. He was caught in a web of betrayal, and the only way out was to confront the truth, even if it meant turning against his own family. The stakes had reached an all-time high for Junior, but in exchange for his testimony against his father, the state agreed to reduce his charges to second-degree murder, eliminating the possibility of the death penalty. This deal also included a plea of guilty to other lesser charges, sealing his decision to finally tell the truth. He reflected on the moment he saw the headline about the gruesome events that unfolded that night. "I knew right when I saw that headline on the news that it was done." Meanwhile, the police were carefully piecing together the evidence. They executed a raid on Tundidor's business and uncovered a chilling array of items linking him directly to the crime. Among the findings were zip ties identical to those used to restrain the Morrises, a set of walkie-talkies, and even a handful of euros tossed carelessly into a trash can outside the establishment. Investigators documented a charred area in the parking lot, meticulously collecting samples of the residue left behind. Security footage captured the scene from the early hours of April 6th, revealing the area being deliberately set ablaze at precisely 2:30 a.m., a damning piece of evidence against Tundidor. In the middle of these developments, a dramatic confrontation unfolded between Tundidor and his elder son, Sean. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Sean pressed his father for the truth. In a surprising moment of honesty, Tundidor admitted to Sean that he hadn't initially intended to kill Joseph Morrissey that fateful night. He confessed that it was supposed to be a robbery, his voice filled with desperation. Junior had been led to believe that the payoff would simply be money for drugs, but the situation spiraled far beyond their expectations. This shocking truth drove a bigger wedge between Sean and his father. Sean struggled to accept what his father had done and the serious impact it would have on their lives. The family was now engulfed in a nightmare, torn apart by greed, betrayal, and a tragic turn of events that would haunt them forever. But things had escalated far beyond a simple theft. As Sean tried to piece together the events of that harrowing night, he recalled a pair of white sneakers he had left in the car. Tundador's response sent a shiver down Sean's spine. "They're not white anymore, not when I was done with them," he replied, implying that the shoes were stained during the violent events at the Morrises' home. The situation grew even more heated as Tundador ranted about Joseph trying to evict him, insisting that he couldn't allow his family to be thrown out onto the streets. He boasted that nobody messed with Tundador and that nobody would get away with it, which revealed a motive driven by revenge and desperation. With chilling calmness, Tundador instructed Sean to fetch the rent checks from the mailbox, grimly noting that they no longer needed to pay the landlord since he was dead. Realizing the depths of his father's depravity, Sean made a crucial decision. He chose to cooperate with the police by wearing a wire to record his conversations with Tundador. This strategic move would ultimately lead to evidence that would prove crucial in the courtroom. On the tape, jurors heard Tundador recount the night of the crime, detailing how Junior had directed the Morrises to the bank to withdraw money. He even boasted that Linde couldn't point him or Junior out in a lineup, underestimating her ability to identify them. Even more chillingly, Tundador revealed his strategy to deflect blame onto a supposed accomplice named Will, insisting that he wouldn't allow Junior to shoulder the murder charges alone. This revelation not only solidified his guilt, but also exposed a web of deception and manipulation that would unravel in the courtroom, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. And as the truth began to surface, the stakes grew higher, and the consequences of their actions emerged large on the horizon. His confidence echoed through his words as he boldly declared that the murder weapon would never be found. Tundador even went so far as to warn Hilda and Sean against prying into the details or questioning his actions, asserting his control over the situation. However, the unfolding drama didn't end with the tape. During the trial, defense attorneys mercilessly grilled Sean, honing in on his initial police statements, where he lied to provide Junior with an alibi. As the tension mounted, he ultimately confessed that Tundador had admitted to the murderous actions at the Morrises' home. Sean recounted the tense as he remembered his father bragging about the crime. He recalled that Tundador boasted about stabbing Joseph multiple times, treating the incident like a joke. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Tundador seemed to enjoy discussing his dark actions, showing no remorse for what he had done.
But one man took the stand and threw well-known and well-respected criminal defense lawyer Jim Lewis under the bus.
The trial took another dramatic turn when a well-known and respected criminal defense lawyer, Jim Lewis, found himself thrown under the bus. One witness claimed that Lewis, who had at one point represented both Tundador and Junior, instructed his clients to destroy crucial evidence linked to the case. This evidence included the gun used to rob and intimidate Joseph Morrissey and his family, revealing a deeper layer of corruption and fraud within the legal proceedings. The jurors were confronted with a troubling narrative: a father's betrayal, a son's entanglement in crime, and a legal system grappling with the implications of suppressed evidence and coerced confessions. With every new finding, the stakes grew higher, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation between truth and deceit that would determine the fate of those involved. The shadows of the past emerged, leaving the courtroom in a suffocating silence as the weight of the decisions made began to sink in. But here's the twist. Tundador's lawyers tried to shift the blame onto Junior and Sean, claiming they were the real murderers. They focused on the parts of Junior's statements to the police that didn't add up and mentioned some strange things he had said to other inmates while in jail. They also talked about Tundador's health issues, trying to convince everyone that he couldn't commit such violent acts. Despite their efforts, the evidence against Tundador was very strong. The trial went on with both sides arguing fiercely about the facts. On May 9, 2012, after 5.5 hours of discussion, the jury announced that Tundador was guilty of all charges. The weight of this moment was heavy for everyone in the room. When the jury foreman said the verdict, it was a chilling reminder. A father's job is to protect his kids, not to hurt them. The next phase was the sentencing, which was just as dramatic. On November 7, 2014, everyone in the courtroom held their breath as the judge prepared to announce Tundidor's fate. He was sentenced to death. The court explained this decision by pointing out several important reasons. Tundidor's history of violent crimes, his involvement in kidnapping and arson, the money he wanted from the crime, the brutal way he murdered, and how he had planned everything carefully. Each reason painted a clear picture of a man who created a night of terror for his own gain.
I'm Nick Robinson in the Sun Sentinel newsroom. A 23-year-old plantation murder suspect has offered up testimony that could send his own father to death row. In exchange, Randy H. Tundidor pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. The Tundidors stand accused of breaking into a Nova Southeastern University professor's home, kidnapping the professor and his wife, and ultimately stabbing the professor to death.
As this story unfolded, it showed a family torn apart by betrayal and a court trying to untangle a web of lies. When the judge's gavel came down, it marked the end of this chapter, but left lasting effects on everyone involved. This case highlighted the complicated nature of justice and the ability of people to show both kindness and cruelty. What are your thoughts on how justice was served in this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Thank you for watching. We'll see you guys soon.